Greetings. Father Mark signing on, continuing the course on the modern papacy with the next installment of the reign of Pope Pius VI. Last time we got up to November 2nd, 1789, where the National Assembly, the Revolutionary Assembly in France, voted to steal or nationalize all church property. On November 7th, 1789, this is bizarre, they voted that no member of the assembly could become a minister of the government. And in a sense, they borrowed this from us, in that, one in our system, one cannot serve simultaneously in Congress and in the executive branch. Like a member of Congress cannot be Secretary of State and remain in Congress. I mean, someone who was in Congress can become Secretary of State, but they have to, resign from that position. So they're imitating that from us, but not the rest of it. So they're kind of moving a parliamentary system, which is the reverse, like the English system, where the members of Parliament, like the Prime Minister and all of the cabinet, are members of Parliament, including the Prime Minister. So anyway, but this decision sabotaged or torpedoed the hopes of Mirabeau and Lafayette to have an English-style parliamentary constitutional monarchy. In the same month, the Breton Club was reconstituted in Paris at the Saint-Honoré monastery of the Dominicans. This is the Jacobins, who I alluded to earlier. It's the Society of Friends of the Constitution. Well, we mentioned them already. So in November, mitosis occurred again within the Jacobin movement. More radical members withdrew and formed their own club, their political party, so to speak, and rented a former Franciscan convent in Paris. And so this became the Club of the Cordeliers, Cordeliers. Just as Jacobin was the nickname for the Dominicans in France, because their first base in Paris was on the Rue Saint-Jacques. The nickname for French Franciscans was Cordelier, because of the rope cincture that they wore. Now, this club, the Cordelier Club, officially they were the Society of the Friends of the Rights of Man and the Citizen. Originally consisting of 300 members, it was open to working-class men and women. So it was the first of these clubs open to women. And even though women did not have the vote at this time. And this was the group, the Cordelier Club, the Society of the Friends of the... they coined the famous slogan, Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité, freedom, equality, brotherhood. I shouldn't laugh. I mean, many of them were really sincere. It's just, I'll laugh as you see what this whole thing became a theme park for Satan. December 9th, 1789, the Assembly decided to divide France into departments, 83 departments, administrative departments, to replace the former 39 provinces. You see, provinces, that sounds too feudalism, too royal and aristocratic. And then December 19th. It's going to be hard to even get this out. December 19th, 1789. Remember, what triggered this whole thing is the collapse of the economy, and that nothing that's happened so far has even addressed that issue. The collapsing economy, and that there's no money to pay anybody. Wait a minute. I gotta. Sorry about that. Yeah, nothing done so far has addressed that issue. So December 19th, 1789, they got a solution. They introduced the assignat, ASSIGNAT, the assignat in English, the assignat. This was a new monetary instrument. It was essentially an IOU, an order to pay. So we've seen that they can't use gold and silver to back the paper money because there was no gold and silver left in the treasury. And they could not issue paper money backed by the full faith and credit of the monarchy because that obviously that didn't have any of that yet. So the assignat was paper money. It was an IOU, but functionally paper money, backed by the national goods. And what were the national goods? The property stolen from the church. All right, so at this point, they're saying all the property taken from the church they're considering it like a national trust or the national goods. And that is going to provide the backing for the assignat, for the paper money. All right. Initially, the first decree was voted through, issued 400 million assignats, certificates of indebtedness, each one worth 1,000 livres, with an interest rate of 5%, and secured and repayable based on auctioning. Was that okay? We're going to auction off all the land stolen from the church, auctioning off the national goods, the bien national. So functionally, it was paper money, and they actually thought, and the reason I was laughing so much is that these people, they come up with these fantasy utopian solutions, and they make it more complicated, but just by avoiding simple mathematics. So there's a finite amount of land that was stolen from the church. Now, the church in France is very wealthy. I'm not denying that. That accrued, vast estates over the centuries. But it was still finite. And so that is going to be, and once it's gone, it's gone. It's not like gold or silver that can circulate. I mean, you buy it, but then you can sell other things and get some back. I mean, once it's gone, once the land is gone, it's gone. Yet that was going to be the basis for their current. Okay. January 7th, 1790, move into the next year. Another riot in Versailles over no food, and the food that was there was, charging gouging prices. So there was another riot, had to be suppressed with violence. More people died. February 13th, 1790, with their country falling into the abyss, the atheists in the assembly still found time and energy to continue attacking the church. Stealing all church property was evidently not enough. So that date was a decree on monasticism. The assembly outlawed all contemplative and mendicant religious orders, arguing that they consumed resources while contributing nothing to society. And they presented this as a liberation. So the inmates, as they were called, the inmates were then freed, to go engage in a productive life. For the moment, religious congregations involved in education and hospital work were allowed to remain, but that would end 2 years later, and they'll shut them down too. Meanwhile, 4 months later, on June 19th, the radicals turned their scopes back to the aristocracy, as we'll see. But sticking with the chronology, February 28th, the Assembly abolished the requirement that army officers be members of the nobility. March 8th, 1790, the Assembly decided to continue the institution of slavery in French colonies, but did permit the establishment of colonial assemblies to act as colonial legislatures. Okay, now this may say, where did this come from? All right, I'll talk about this more in the American history course. But France, after they lost the 7 Years' War, they lost Canada and the Louisiana Territory. So they lost the continental colonies in the Western Hemisphere. But they still retained some islands, Guadeloupe, Martinique, Saint-Domingue, which is now Haiti. And even though they're islands, they're geographically very small, but they were sources of vast wealth from the plantations, sugar and indigo and cotton. Sugar, indigo, cotton is primarily. Tobacco and coffee also, but the real big, the sugar, tobacco, cotton. And plantations, of course, are worked by slaves. So these colonies were founded by companies, private companies, and sponsored by the government. So it's public-private, like the license to us. There were monopolies. So a company would apply to the monarch. The monarch would grant them a license. The license was a legal monopoly to control something somewhere. For example, in Haiti, where Saint-Domingue, which is now Haiti, it was merchants from Bordeaux who funded it. But it was only worth the investment to them because they got the license from the king guaranteeing that they would have a monopoly on the sugar produced in Haiti. So, and because it was mercantile, some of these merchants moved to Haiti, some went back and forth, or some members of the family would go there, some would stay in Bordeaux. But because of the mercantile system, these colonies, the plantation owners, they were not allowed to just sell their produce wherever they wanted. They had to ship, say, the sugar from Haiti to France, and they could not even have a refinery in Haiti. They had, even though they could do it technically. I mean, practically they could do it, but legally they could not. They had to ship their sugar across the Atlantic Ocean to France to be refined. And then they could only purchase refined sugar from France, even though they're making it there on the island. They had to ship it across the ocean, have it refined in France, then buy it at a higher price, at the refined price, and pay the shipping cost to come back. And so that was the whole, they talk about taxation without representation. Well, when all this started, the French colonists in Guadeloupe, Martinique, Saint-Domingue, that they also wanted liberty. They wanted freedom from this mercantile system. So they sent people to Paris to petition. Now, there are two other factors. So that they had in common with the mother country, what was going on in France. They had two other categories of problem that were distinct to those colonies that did not exist, that were not problems in France. First, the slavery. Obviously, slavery. Slavery was not legal in France, but slavery was legal in the French Empire, and they even had a law code, the Code Noir, which was applied. And we'll talk about that when we get to the American history course, because it was applied in the Louisiana Territory, but also in all these colonies, which governed how slaves in the French, system were to work and be treated. So that was a distinct problem for the colonies. Second related to slavery was the existence of a large of a population in these colonies that were biracial. I think now, meaning that they had mixed French, that they had both French and African blood, and this was a big deal. That they actually had separate names to describe the percentages. For a person who was half French and half African, or someone who was a fourth, or an eighth, or a 16th, they had separate names for all that. Now, since this is on YouTube, I don't know what the terms of service are, if we can even use those terms, but I'm not. So we'll just say that a racially mixed population, meaning a population that clearly had some African blood. So meaning at some point had ancestors who were slaves, but they also had French blood. And so this population in those colonies, in those 3 island colonies in the Caribbean, they were free. So this ethnically mixed, they were free. They could own property. They could own slaves. They could own businesses. However, the French, the pure French blood, colonist, treated them as inferior. Now, they were superior to slaves in terms of the law, but the ethnically French colonists treated them as inferior because they had mixture of African blood, meaning, former slave blood. That group, representatives of that strata of the population of those colonies, also sent representatives to Paris once the revolution began. And they wanted equal civil rights. As the French colonists had imposed some just de facto practice of discrimination, but others in terms of law for someone who was ethnically mixed, to kind of to limit them, to keep them subordinate. And they wanted that, they wanted equality before the law, regardless of their ethnic heritage. And there were some, both in France as well as some colonists, who regarded slavery as immoral, and thought that with the Declaration of the Rights, that slavery should be abolished. Whereas there were others, merchants, who profited from it, obviously wanted to keep slavery. So at the same time that the first group, the merchant colonists, wanted the National Assembly to free them from the restrictions, the monopoly restrictions imposed, the mercantile restrictions imposed by the monarchy, they also wanted the National Assembly to continue and perpetuate the restrictions on freedom of African slaves, to keep them in perpetual servitude. So that's the background. On March 8th, 1790, the Assembly decided in favor of the merchants, yes, that they would continue. Slavery would continue to be legal in the colonies, but they also gave some crumbs to the ethnically mixed group in allowing legislatures, colonial legislatures, in which they could serve, regardless of their ethnic ancestors. Slaves, of course, couldn't, but those who were ethnically mixed, even if they had slave ancestors, if they were born free, then they could serve in the colonial assemblies. All right. May 12th, 1790. There's more divisions within the Jacobins and the Girondins. So another political party. So Lafayette and Bailly, who were originally, they were Jacobins, then Girondins, then now they formed the Society of 1789, or the Patriotic Club is what it was called, the Club of Patriots. because you saw there was a rift in the Girondins, which were the moderates, but there were some moderates who favored a republic like the United States, but Lafayette and Bailly still preferred a constitutional monarchy like England. So the Society of 89, the Patriots, they were monarchist, so they were the most moderate or conservative in this, then they become the conservatives, in that they want to conserve the monarchy, they want to continue the monarchy, but are okay with eliminating the privileges of aristocracy. Not eliminating aristocracy, not necessarily. They didn't have a problem with hereditary titles, but hereditary privilege eliminate, but keep the monarchy with a parliament. So this is a different society. And then the Girondins then became those who favored a republic, a United States-style republic. June 3rd, 1790. There was an uprising, violent, of the ethnically mixed residents in the French colony of Martinique, because the French, the pure blood French colonists, were not allowing them to serve in the new colonial legislature, even though the National Assembly in France said that they could. So that was violence, and people died. July 12th, 1790, back to attacking the church. The National Assembly in France formulated the Civil Constitution of the Clergy. So they create a national church. Title I, Article 1, quote, each department. Now remember, the departments, that was replacing the provinces. So this becomes analogous to states. I hate to say that because they did not have the same, all the same authority structure as American states, but regional governments, larger than municipalities, but so each department shall form a single diocese, and each diocese shall have the same extent and the same limits as the department, meaning the same borders. So, like if this happened here, then this would be the government saying that instead of the multiple dioceses that we have in Louisiana, that there would only be one diocese, the Diocese of Louisiana, and it would match the borders of the state of Louisiana. Same with Texas, Arkansas, Mississippi, etc. Now, previously, we saw there were 134 dioceses in France. Well, 133 in France, and the fourth was the diocese of the colonies. And that was reduced. So this is reducing it from 133 in the mainland to 83. Continuing the quote, all other bishoprics in the 83 departments of the kingdom are forever abolished. The government erasing dioceses. Skipping down, Article 1, Section 4. Quote, no church or parish of France, nor any French citizen, may acknowledge upon any occasion or upon any pretext whatsoever the authority of an ordinary bishop or of an archbishop whose see shall be under the supremacy of a foreign power. But that's attacking the Pope. See, he's just a foreign Italian bishop. Section 6, quote, a new arrangement and division of all the parishes of the kingdom shall be undertaken immediately. So not only are they, asserting the right to suppress and redraw the boundaries of dioceses, but also parishes. Skipping down, Section 20, all titles and offices other than those mentioned, dignities, canonries, prebends, half-prebends, chapels, chaplainships, both in cathedral and collegiate churches, all regular and secular chapters for either sex, abbacies, priorships, both regular and in commendam for either sex, as well as all other benefices and, in general, of whatever kind or denomination, are from the day of this decree extinguished and abolished, and shall never be reestablished in any form. Title II, Article 1. Beginning with the day of publication of the present decree, there shall be but one mode of choosing bishops and parish priests, namely that of election. All elections, Article 2, all elections shall be by ballot and shall be decided by the absolute majority of the votes. Now, this includes everyone voting, not just Catholics. Everyone in the department could vote for the bishop and priest. Article 1, Section 3, the election of, Article 2, Title 2, Article 3. The election of bishops shall take place according to the forms and by the electoral body designated in the decree. Okay, so, skipping down, Title 2, Article 19. The new bishop may not apply to the Pope for any form of confirmation, but shall write to him as the visible head of the universal church, as a testimony to the unity of the faith and communion maintained with him. So a symbolic head, but not recognizing the authority. So the Pope does not need to confirm this. Bishops are just going to be elected, and priests, the pastors elected. Title II, Article 21. Before the ceremony of consecration begins, the bishop-elect shall take a solemn oath in the presence of the municipal officers to guard with care the faithful of his diocese who are confided to him, to be loyal to the nation, and to support with all his power the Constitution decreed by the National Assembly. Title II, Article 25. The election of parish priests shall take place according to the forms and by the electors designated, so the same. Okay, so this civil constitution of the Church formally reduced the Catholic Church of France to the level of a department of state, with the clergy to be paid as civil servants. The government asserted the right to redraw diocesan and parish boundaries, diocesan boundaries to be coterminous with the replacement for the former provinces, which reduced the number, just erased, a third of the diocese. And it ruled that bishops would be elected by the citizens, all the citizens, Catholic or not. Authority of the Pope was repudiated in jurisdictional terms, but at this point was still saying, acknowledging that he could be respected as a spiritual figurehead, but was not to be consulted, or his ratification of the election was not necessary. And as we'll see, to ensure obedience and conformity, the assembly is going to compose an oath, which a person would take to obey the civil constitution of the clergy. And we'll see, we'll get to that, but just so you have it together in your notes, only 4 bishops out of the 134 took the oath, and 45% of the rest of the clergy took the oath. But seminarians, if they have 4 bishops, you know what that means. Actually, they only need 3, but they have 3 and a spare. With that, they can have valid holy orders. So 3 bishops can ordain another bishop. It's illicit if done without, and it's schismatic if done without the approval of the Pope. But in terms of holy orders, they can do it. July 26, 1790, Marais comes back into the story, publishes another, in this case it's not a pamphlet, it's in his the newspaper he founded, publishes a demand for the immediate execution of 500 to 600 aristocrats in order to save the revolution. October 6th, 1790, Louis XVI wrote secretly to his cousin, Carlos IV of Spain, once again expressing hostility to the revolution, specifically in this case, hostility to this civil constitution, because Louis, he was Catholic, he was sincere in his faith, and he knew that was wrong. But, there was nothing he could do. October 12th, the National Assembly dissolved the previously newly permitted colonial assembly at Saint-Domingue, now Haiti, because of problems that, like in Martinique and it was happening in the other two, Guadeloupe and Saint-Domingue, that when the racially mixed population was trying to get, membership in the newly permitted colonial assemblies, the pureblood French were resisting because they saw them as inferior. So fighting broke out. So that happened, and so the National Assembly said, "Well, okay, then we rescind the offer to have local assemblies." And then the next month, November 25th, there was an uprising of slaves in the French colony of Saint-Domingue, now Haiti. November 27th is when the Assembly formally decrees and puts into writing the oath of loyalty to the civil church, to the national church, and require that the clergy must take the oath. Otherwise, they forfeit, their position and income. December 3rd, Louis XVI wrote another secret letter to the King of Prussia, which is northern Germany, Frederick William II, asking for military intervention, asking a German king to invade France in order to save the French monarchy. December 27th, 39 deputies in the National Assembly, who happened to be clergy, like Saillet, took the oath. They were like, setting the example that they took the oath of allegiance to the government and to the civil constitution of the clergy. February 9th of the next year, 1791, was the first elections of bishops for the Constitutional Church of France. As we'll see, the Pope is going to condemn this, and I'm going to read his condemnation in a minute. February 28th, the day of the Daggers, there was a reaction. I'm not even going to say because the terms are going to. I'll just leave it at that. It was a reaction among the aristocracy, who realized where things were going, and some of them, there were 400 of them, armed themselves, and they wanted to free the king, because the king essentially was trapped. He was not actually a prisoner yet. He was not in a dungeon yet, though that's on the way. But he still did not have freedom of movement. So they got together, and they were gonna break him out, him and the queen and the heir, and go somewhere, flee somewhere, Austria or Spain, somewhere where they could plan the counter-revolution. But Lafayette, he resisted. Even though he was a monarchist, he resisted violently them freeing the king. So he arrested them. A few got killed in the fighting, but the rest were arrested. This is like 400 of them got arrested. March 3rd, the National Assembly orders that all gold and silver objects stolen from the church were to be melted down and coined for money that the government could waste. And March 10th, 1791, Pope Pius VI formally condemns the civil constitution of the clergy. And this is the document Quod Aliquantum, Quod, Q-U-O-D, and then Aliquantum, A-L-I-Q-U-A-N-T-U-M. So, quote, the necessary effect of the Constitution decreed by the Assembly is to annihilate the Catholic religion, and with her obedience owed to kings, With this purpose, it establishes as a right of man in society this absolute liberty that not only ensures the right to be indifferent to religious opinions, but also grants full license to freely think, speak, write, and even print whatever one wishes on religious matters, even the most disordered imaginings. It is a monstrous right, which the Assembly claims, however, results from equality and the natural liberties of all men. But what could be more unwise than to establish among men this equality and this uncontrolled liberty, which stifles all reason, the most precious gift nature gave to man, and the one that distinguishes him from animals? After creating man in a place filled with delectable things, did not God threaten him with death should he eat the fruit of the tree of good and evil? And with this first prohibition, did not God establish limits to the liberty of man? When, after man disobeyed the command and thereby incurred guilt, did not God impose new obligations through the law of Moses? And even though he left to man's free will the choice between good and evil, did not God provide him with precepts and commandments that could save him if he would observe them? Where, then, is this liberty of thinking and acting that the Assembly grants to man in society as an indisputable natural right? Is this invented right not contrary to the right of the Supreme Creator, to whom we owe our existence and all that we have? Can we ignore the fact that man was not created for himself alone, but to be helpful to his neighbor? Man should use his reason first of all to recognize his sovereign Maker, honoring him, admiring him, and submitting his entire person to him. For, from his childhood, he should be submissive to those who are superior to him in age. He should be governed and instructed by their lessons, order his life according to their laws, society, and religion. This inflated equality and liberty, therefore, are for him, from the moment he is born, no more than imaginary dreams and senseless words. Given 10th day of March, the year of our Lord, 1791. Okay. I know this didn't sound right to Americans. All right. And this document, as well as those of future popes who condemn freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, that's going to cause problems for the church in the United States, which I'll talk about in the American history course. Yeah, I'll leave it at that because seminarians, I'm going to go into a lot of detail for that. And actually, I think it's already on YouTube. I have a whole playlist on for the American history, the church in the United States. It's in there. But if you don't want to watch it, we'll get to it in your fourth year course. March 25th, after this, the Assembly formally severed diplomatic relations between France and the Vatican. April 2nd, Mirabeau died of heart disease. April 3rd, the Assembly, the government had already stolen all church property, so they decided to repurpose one of the churches stolen, Saint Genevieve, in Paris. They renamed it the Pantheon. And they were going to use it as a mausoleum for illustrious citizens of France. And Mirabeau was the first one interred there. 10 days later, April 13th, 1791, Pope Pius VI issues another document condemning the oath required from clergy to support the civil constitution of the church. And this document the title is simply Caritas. So, quote, "Love, which is patient and kind, as the Apostle Paul says, supports and endures all things, as long as a hope remains that mildness will prevent the growth of incipient errors. But if errors increase daily and reach the point of creating schism, the laws of love itself, together with our duty, demand that we reveal to the erring their horrible sin and the heavy canonical penalties which they have incurred. For this sternness will lead those who are wandering from the way of truth to recover their senses, reject their errors, and come back to the church, which opens its arms like a kind mother and embraces them on their return. The rest of the faithful, in this way, will be quickly delivered from the deceits of false pastors who enter the fold by ways other than the door, and whose only aim is theft, slaughter, and destruction. With these divine precepts in mind, we have just learned of the war against the Catholic religion, which has been started by the revolutionary thinkers, who, as a group, form a majority in the National Assembly of France. We have wept in God's presence, shared our sorrow with the cardinals, and proclaimed public and private prayers. Then we wrote to King Louis on July 9, 1790, and repeatedly encouraged him not to confirm the civil constitution of the clergy, which would lead his people into error and schism. For it was intolerable that a political assembly should change the universal practice of the Church, disregard the opinions of the Holy Fathers and the decrees of the councils, overturn the order of the hierarchy, and control the election of bishops, destroy episcopal sees, and introduce a worse form into the Church after removing the better. We would regard any bishops appointed in accordance with its decrees as schismatic and lacking all ecclesiastical jurisdiction. The king would certainly have refrained from approving the Constitution, but the National Assembly finally forced him to lend his authority to the Constitution, as his letters to us on July 8th, September 6th, and December 16th attest. He besought us insistently to approve 5 and later 7 articles at least provisionally. These articles were so similar in tenor that they formed a comprehensive summary of the new Constitution. We saw at once, of course, that we could approve or tolerate none of the articles since they were at variance with canonical regulations. In the meanwhile, we were greatly consoled when a majority of the French bishops firmly opposed the Constitution and attacked every point in it which referred to the government of the Church. Our consolation was increased when Cardinal Rochefoucauld, the Archbishop of Aix, and 30 other archbishops and bishops appealed to us for assistance in meeting such great dangers. On October 10th, they sent an explanation of the main points contained in the Constitution of the Clergy and requested our help and advice. We were further consoled because many other bishops joined the 30 in accepting this explanation. Only 4 out of 131 bishops dissented. A great number of capitulars and most of the parish priests and lower clergy also joined the bishops. Now, 131, that's because a few bishops had died, so there were 134 dioceses, but there were 131 bishops living. So out of those, initially 4 defected and went into schism, and by taking the oath to the civil constitution. All right, skipping down. To instantly disperse all faithful bishops and parish priests, the decrees provided that all pastors should swear unequivocally that they would observe the Constitution already published and the one which was to be published later. Those who refused were to be considered expelled from their office, and their sees and parishes were to lose their pastor. When the lawful pastors and ministers were driven out, by force if necessary, the municipal districts could set about electing new bishops and parish priests. Upon election, these men were to disregard the metropolitans and senior bishops who had refused the oath, and to go to the assembly executive, which would appoint some bishops to ordain them. These civil oaths should be regarded as perjury and sacrilege, unbefitting not merely the clergy, but any Catholic. All actions which are based on these oaths should be seen as schismatic, null, void, and liable to severe censures. All right, that's section 8. Among those who have been overcome by this wicked deceit, the first was Charles, Bishop of Autun. And then he lists the 4 bishops who defected. No, this one, the Bishop of Autun, we're going to meet him again. This is the famous Talleyrand, Talleyrand. He was an aristocrat, and we'll get to him. All right, skipping down. Our March 10th letters to the king and to the bishops were both entrusted to an express messenger who left early the next day. Let's get on. We learned from many sources that the schism had been completed in Paris on February 24th. For on that day, the Bishop of Autun, that's Charles Maurice de Talleyrand Périgord, the Bishop of Autun, Autun, already stained with perjury and guilty of desertion for relinquishing his church into the hands of laymen on his own authority, defied his chapter by joining with the bishops of, he calls the bishops of Babylon. Then he goes on to name them. So on that day, the Bishop of Autun, with the assistance of these other bishops, rashly and sacrilegiously consecrated he gives the name, but he consecrated another. So these were legitimately ordained bishops. So 3 of them can consecrate new bishops. So the Pope is saying that already these guys had already done that. They had consecrated 2 new bishops for the civil constitutional church, and they would consecrate others. And then he goes on, denounces that. Therefore, to hinder this, skipping down to section 20, therefore to hinder the spread of schism from the start, to recall to their duty those who have strayed, to fortify the good in their purpose, and to preserve religion in that prosperous kingdom, we follow the advice of the cardinals and answer the prayers of the entire group of bishops of the French Church. Imitating the example of our predecessors, we proclaim that each and every cardinal, archbishop, bishop, abbot, vicar, canon, parish priest, curate, and member of the clergy, whether secular or regular, who has purely and simply taken the civil oath as ordered by the National Assembly, is suspended from the exercise of his office, and will act irregularly if he exercises his office, unless he abjures his oath within 40 days from this date. For the oath is the poisoned source and origin of all errors, and the chief cause of the sorrow of the French Catholic Church. Section 21. Furthermore, we declare specifically that the elections of the said, and then he lists the bishops who had been elected, are unlawful, sacrilegious, and utterly void. We rescind, efface, and abrogate them, as well as the recent creation of the so-called diocese. I won't cloud the issue by reading all those names. Section 22. We similarly declare and decree that their consecrations were sinful and are illicit, unlawful, sacrilegious, and at variance with the regulations of the sacred canons. Since they were rashly and wrongfully elected, they lack all ecclesiastical and spiritual jurisdiction for the guidance of souls, and have been suspended from all exercise of the episcopal office. Section 25. We also command and prohibit, under the same punishment of suspension, both the men consecrated and their consecrators, from illicitly conferring the sacrament of confirmation or holy orders, or exercising in any way the episcopal office from which they have been suspended. Consequently, anyone ordained by them should realize that he is suspended and will be guilty of irregularity if he exercises the orders he has received. Skipping down. No, okay, so I'll interject here. So consider the position that the clergy in France are put in. The government is saying, and you are going to be without a job, without income, without a place to live, unless you take this oath. The Pope is saying, if you take that oath, then you are stripped of theologically of the faculties and the spiritual jurisdiction to legitimately fulfill those offices. So in order to survive practically, to have an income, to eat, to have a place to live, the clergy would have to be spiritually and ecclesially, canonically illegitimate in the eyes of the church. So it's putting them in a terrible position. All right, skipping down section 30. We also address you, beloved sons, parish priests, and curates. Curates, that's they use different terms. So, like in their terms, the vicar was the pastor, and the curate was the associate, the other priest who was not a pastor. Whereas in our usage in the United States, the pastor is the priest, who's officially in charge of the parish, and the parochial vicar is the priest assigned with him to the parish, but like his assistant. But anyway, that's so he's addressing the parish priest, who in great numbers and firm virtues have performed your duty far differently from your colleagues who, overcome by weakness or swept away by the tide of ambition, have gone over to the service of error. We hope that these men will soon return to their duty on receiving our admonition. Press on bravely with the work you have begun, and bear in mind that the appointment you receive from your lawful bishops can be taken from you only by them. Consequently, even if you are removed from your place by the civil power, you will still always be the lawful pastors, in duty bound as far as you are able to keep off the thieves who try to sneak into your place with the sole aim of destroying the souls entrusted to your care, whose salvation you will have to account for. 32, skipping down to section 32. Finally, in one word, stay close to us, for no one can be in the Church of Christ without being in unity with its visible head and founded on the See of Peter. Given at Rome, 13th of April, 1791, the 17th year of our pontificate. May 16th. And then we meet another of these guys, Maximilian Robespierre, Robespierre, another member of the professional class rather than the aristocracy. In his case, he was a lawyer. He is in the assembly, and he on May 16th he moves that the assembly vote to forbid members of the current assembly from becoming candidates in the next assembly. So I alluded to this earlier, but this is the actual date that it happened, May 16th, 1791, so that each new assembly would be completely new. So that's an extreme form of term limits, which doomed it to cyclical radicalization, because all the moderates in one, well, they couldn't run again. So then you have the next people and next people, and since the situation in France is not improving, the economy is still wrecked. So each one, there's more and more frustration as each year passes. So each new assembly is going to be more and more radical because nothing they're trying is working. I mean, of course, because it's stupid. Of course it's not going to work. But they're still. But to be fair, that people are hungry, and the supply chains are broken down because nobody's getting paid, and and why should a farmer, of course the people in the countryside, they can eat, they grow their own food, but why should they send money to this? Why should they send their produce, which they worked hard to grow, to the city when they're not going to get paid for it? So June 14th, the Assembly abolishes corporations. That's going to do wonders for the economy. Yeah? They see the government's just going to take care of all this. June 15th, the Assembly forbids priests, even priests who've taken the oath, from wearing ecclesiastical garb, outside of the church. All right, June 20th and 21st on the night. It started in the evening of the 20th, and the event went into the, actually the 22nd. 20th or 22nd was the event. So having had one attempt to rescue them fail, the king and queen, they saw where things were going, and Louis, as indecisive as he was, he finally agreed. He put it off many times. He should have left when his brothers left, but, should have. I mean, that's hindsight. But he just couldn't. So he had this fantasy that the common people really loved him. That it was really just a few radicals and, screamers that in Paris that were causing trouble. But anyway, by this point, when he finally made up his mind to escape. So on the night of the 20th, June 20th, 1791, the king, the queen, their children, snuck out of the Tuileries, the palace where they were staying. They fled by carriage, and their objective was to get to Montmédy, where they, thought they had some loyal troops, and then maybe even leave the country, because he had been corresponding, and so had Marie Antoinette. So he thought he would have at least some Austrian support, since she was sister to the Austrian emperor. But they were recognized. He went too slow. He waited too long. They were recognized in one village, so then word spread, and then they were arrested in the next village. So they were arrested at Varennes, Varennes. So if you want to Google this, it's called the Flight to Varennes. Even though Varennes was not their destination, they wanted to get much farther away, but Varennes is as far as they got. So Louis, they caught him, and they brought him back to Paris. The assembly then was enraged, and they suspended his functions as monarch until further notice. And this was it. The royal family was never free again. Both the king and queen would be murdered, and the Dauphin died in captivity. On July 5th, the Austrian emperor, who's now Joseph II, the one we already met, he died childless. So he was followed by his younger brother, Leopold II. So still, this guy's a brother to the Queen Marie Antoinette. After the arrest on July 5th, they were caught on June 22nd. By June 25th, they were back in Paris in custody, prisoners. So on July 5th, the Emperor Leopold II issued what's called the Padua Circular, calling on all the royal houses of Europe to come to the aid of Louis XVI for the sake of preserving monarchy, privilege, aristocracy in all countries. Like I said, regardless of the history of warfare, with France, this hurts all of us. It hurts our state. If this becomes a precedent, we don't want our own people getting ideas, about constitutions and freedom. July 9th, the Assembly decreed that all émigrés, all those who fled, must return to France within 2 months, or their property would be stolen. Their property would be confiscated for the good of the nation. July 16th, there's another rift within the Jacobin Club, as more moderate members break away. They thought all this was going too far. So these are the Feuillants, became another political party. These are the Society of the Friends of the Constitution, another one. But it's colloquially called the Feuillant Club, Feuillants, Feuillant. Because, again, named for where they met. They met in the priory of a former of the Feuillant monks on the Saint-Honoré, the Saint-Honoré Street in Paris. This group, the Feuillants, they were a reform group of the Cistercians. A group of Cistercians seceded and formed their own monastic group. And at this abbey, the Feuillants Abbey in France. So that was the location. That's where they got the name. So this was they were moderate constitutional monarchs. So even after the king ran away, and revealed, essentially repudiated, because he had been agreeing with all these things. I mean, under duress, of course, but there were those who said, "Oh, okay, at least he's open to some constitutional limitations." But when he ran away, they realized, okay, no, he was just buying time. But still, so that turned many of the Girondins against him. But the Feuillants were those who still said, no, he's still the king. And they still wanted a constitutional monarchy. August 2nd, 1791, the Declaration of Pillnitz. That's a place in Saxony, Pillnitz. So Saxony's in Germany. The perilous situation of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette prompted her brother, Leopold II of Austria, as well as Frederick William II of Prussia, to declare themselves ready to join other European powers in restoring monarchy to France. Russia and Sweden agreed to help. England remained neutral for the moment. The French Legislative Assembly then hastily started organizing troops to protect the frontier. August 22nd, 1791, another uprising occurred in one of the French Caribbean colonies, and this one was going to last. This was on the island, the French colony of Saint-Domingue, present-day Haiti. And this turned out to be the first successful slave revolt in history. Successful in the sense that not only, but that it formed its own government. It formed their own country. So, Haiti. On December 5th, 1492, Columbus landed on an island in the Caribbean and named it Spanish Island, or Hispaniola. In the Treaty of Ryswick, which ended one of the pointless wars, the War of the Grand Alliance in 1697, France received the western third of the island, which they call Saint-Domingue. The rest of the eastern part of the island went to Spain, and that was Saint-Domingue, when is now the Dominican Republic. Well, let's see, actually. See, I had the European. Actually, I had the European. I got to find the hemisphere. Pause here. Okay, so that island there, that's Hispaniola, as Columbus called it. See, on one side is Haiti, and the other side is the Dominican Republic. But it's the same island. Oh, and just for, here is Cuba. Right. You see Florida, United States, and here's Cuba. And then, let's see, Puerto Rico. See, Jamaica, Puerto Rico, Haiti, Dominican Republic. It's all the Caribbean islands. Okay, so beginning in 1713, a commercial migration of Frenchmen from Bordeaux relocated to this colony, and in order to exploit its potential for sugar production, and then it expanded to indigo, cotton, coffee, tobacco. But sugar is the one that was the real moneymaker for this colony. Its sugar industry flourished to the point that before this slave revolt, that one French colony was producing 40% of the sugar in the world, commercial sugar in the world. Now, 18th century sugar plantations in the Caribbean were, all exaggeration aside, they were death camps. The intensity of the labor, the harshness of the climate, the extreme heat and humidity, coupled with the astronomical profits to be made, prompted French royal and commercial interest to fund vast expeditions to capture, kidnap, large groups of Africans, enslave them, and then capture them in Africa, enslave them, transport them across the Atlantic Ocean to work in plantations until they died. The population of Saint-Domingue at the time of the slave revolt consisted of 40,000 Frenchmen or whites, 40,000 Frenchmen, and 500,000 African slaves. Because the high mortality rate among the workers required constant supplies of fresh slaves, the field slaves were for the most part young adult males who remembered life in Africa. Like they weren't just bred in captivity and knew nothing else. They remembered life in Africa, and many of them, they had grown up hunting and fighting. So this set them apart from domestic slaves who had been born into captivity and worked in the mansions of the French owners. For the field slaves, in this case, the thought of escaping and having to survive in the mountains was not at all intimidating. And the alternative of a few months, being tortured into working to death, just drove many of them to escape. Figure, well, I'm going to die anyway, so, I might as well run away and at least, have a chance, right? Because staying here to work means, certain death in a few months. So these escaped African slaves banded together in the mountains, surviving partially through hunting and partially through raiding French commerce and French settlements. The few French expeditions sent into the mountains to capture them simply disappeared. So the presence in the mountains of large groups of armed escaped slaves who reestablished among themselves the hunter-warrior bands that they knew in Africa accounts for the success of the Haitian Revolution, which included destroying a French army of 30,000 troops sent to recapture the island. The name Saint-Domingue was changed to Haiti, which was a Gallicized form of the Taino Indian word for the island, which was Aishi, which means land of mountains. And the loss of an entire army trying to get this back, is what prompted Napoleon later to cut his losses, and the Louisiana Purchase, which again we'll cover in the American history course. September 27th. So still the assembly, they don't want to lose Saint-Domingue, but they've lost. They're going to keep pouring troops in there to try to recapture it, but they keep getting defeated. Nevertheless, on September 27th, the National Assembly in France declares that all those living in France, physically living in France, regardless of color or ancestry, are free, but preserve slavery in all the French colonies. November 25th, the Legislative Assembly, that's what they call it, not the National Assembly, then the National Constituent Assembly, then the National Convention, so now it's the Legislative Assembly, created a committee of surveillance, to ensure that everyone is committed to the revolution. December 3rd, Louis XVI writes again to Frederick William II of Prussia, urging him to intervene militarily in France to prevent, quote, to prevent the evil which is happening here before it overtakes the other states of Europe. December 14th, with these other European countries on the way, they were being dilatory about it, but they obviously somebody was going to come. Lafayette then received command of one of the three new armies established to defend the French borders. He was given command of the Army of the Center, as it was called, based at Metz. And then other guys were given commands of the other two, Rochambeau, the Army of the North, and Luckner, the Army of the Rhine. Moving into the next year, 1792, on February 1st, the Assembly decreed that French citizens are required to have a passport to travel even in the interior of their own country. So papers, have to have papers, even to travel in your own country. All right, 1792 through 1798 is the first coalition war against the French Revolution, and then there'll be others against Napoleon. There ended up being 5, depending on how you count. There was another after the 100 Days. If you count that one as a separate, then after Napoleon escaped from Elba during the 100 Days, if you count that one, that would be 6 coalitions. But others would just consider that part of the 5th, because it was the English and the Prussians. Anyway. So the First Coalition War, February 7th, 1792, the Austro-Prussian alliance began moving troops to the French frontier. The Kingdom of Piedmont, Sardinia joined them. Agreed to join them. It didn't send troops yet, but they pledged to send troops. February 9th, the Assembly decreed the confiscation for the good of the nation of all émigrés who had fled France and had refused to return. And this was all for the good of the nation. So it was added to the national goods, as was the stolen church property. On April 2nd, 1792, the French Assembly declared war on Austria. And fighting commenced immediately in Flanders, present-day Belgium. But the Austrians achieved the first victory at Lille. All right, seen in its larger context, this is yet another of the endless, Franco-Austrian wars that have been going on for centuries. We started covering this in the medieval course. In this case, though, the excuse was political ideology instead of dynastic ambition or trade disputes. The war signaled escalation of violence in Paris as the radicals became increasingly bold and unafraid of retribution. There were widespread arrests of priests who refused to swear the oath to the civil constitution of the clergy, and all remaining religious congregations were legislated out of existence. As we already saw, the monastics and the mendicants had already been, but now with this in 92, the rest, all religious communities, were legislated out of existence. On July 11th, 1792, the coalition army, meaning the monarchist army against the French Revolution, but in support of the French monarchy, Louis XVI, mustered at Koblenz under the command of Karl Wilhelm, the Duke of Brunswick. He had 80,000 troops at the muster, 42,000 Prussians, 30,000 Austrians, and a smaller number of Hessian mercenaries, French émigrés. And by this point, some of the Sardinian troops, Piedmontese and Sardinian troops, arrived. The Austrians began advancing, Brunswick and the coalition army began advancing slowly towards the French frontier. And the National Assembly declared that the nation was in danger. August 9th, 1792, Georges Danton is another one of these guys, Danton. Another man of the professional class, rather than aristocrat. He was a lawyer by profession. He had been involved thus far. He was a Jacobin, but then moved every time there was a rift. He moved to the more radical side on the side of the sans-culotte, even though he was not working class. On August 9th of 92, he serving as a deputy prosecutor in the city of Paris. He was a member of the Cordelier Club, and on that date they took over the municipal government of Paris and established the first revolutionary Paris commune. So communism, this is where this starts. They took possession of the Hôtel de Ville, the city hall, and they increased the number of the commune deputies to 288. The National Assembly recognized the Commune as the legitimate government of the city of Paris on August 10th. Same day, August 10th, 1792. A Paris mob, once again, started as a hunger riot, but then just, people, when they're desperate, they just lose their minds. So, because there's no food. I mean, they're rioting to go to take food to somebody that there wasn't. I mean, they were already eating rats, and so they're desperate. They stormed the royal palace. There were many of them, I have to be specific. The Tuileries, Tuileries. It no longer exists. It was destroyed in a later revolution, which we may get to later in the course. But it was on the grounds of the Louvre. So if you imagine the Louvre shaped like a U, the Tuileries was on the closed end of the rectangle. Stormed it, and there were a Swiss guard there defending Louis and Marie Antoinette, and they fought to the death. They were hopelessly outnumbered. They fought to the death, and their sacrifice provided sufficient time for Louis and Marie to seek refuge with the National Assembly, of all places. Lafayette thought of using the National Guard to impose order, but they wouldn't. He learned, the jarring experience as Louis had before, that you couldn't trust the troops to fire on the mob. Because none of these guys are getting paid. I mean, these guys are now in uniform. They're serving the revolution, hoping that they'll fix things, and then eventually they'll get paid, because the monarch already had proven that he couldn't pay them. So there's limits to how much you can trust unpaid men. Lafayette then fled. He fled France. He realized that the movement had gone too far, that it was not going to be a constitution of monarchy. And so he fled France, and he surrendered to the Austrians. By the time he got to them and surrendered, it was August 20th. Of course, they assumed he was a spy and just put him in jail. So he stayed in jail for the next 5 years. The following day, August 11th, the day after the storming of the Tuileries, 1792, the Assembly legislated the French monarchy out of existence and elected, so there's no executive now, not even a pretense of having an executive officer in the country. Rather than electing a single president like the United States, they were fearful of having executive authority in the hands of one person. So they created a committee to wield executive authority. This was a new executive committee of the National Assembly to act as the national executive. Danton was named the Minister of Justice. And all municipalities, meaning all the cities and towns in France, were authorized to arrest suspected enemies of the revolution. And any publications, newspapers, journals, pamphlets, that were advocating royalist positions were outlawed. So much for freedom of speech. August 13th, the royal family was actually imprisoned, not just held confined in a palace, but actually put, in a dungeon. And it was a place called the Temple. That means it was a former base of the Knights Templar, which had a dungeon. So that's where they were put and very badly treated. August 17th, at the demand of Maximilian Robespierre, the Commune and the Commune of Paris, which was Danton, they threatened the Assembly with an armed uprising if they did not comply. So the Assembly voted to create a Revolutionary Tribunal, the members of which were to be selected by the Paris Commune, and agreed to the summoning. And the Assembly agreed to the summoning of a national convention to replace itself, to replace the Assembly. So this Revolutionary Tribunal, the Tribunal Revolutionnaire, also called the Popular Tribunal, the People's Tribunal, was a court. instituted for the trial of enemies of the revolution, or enemies of the people. This was the first, this was the instrumental causality of the Reign of Terror. August 18th, the Assembly formally abolishes the actual decree, formally abolishing even religious teaching orders and those running hospitals. So that was the last of the remaining religious in France. August 19th, 1792, the Allied coalition finally crosses the border in France. And the Duke of Brunswick captured the fortress of Verdun and moved slowly through the Argonne forest. He expected an ambush that never came. Now, though he had no way of knowing the opportunity he missed, while Brunswick, procrastinated in the Argonne forest, the revolution turned again to a lower level of the abyss. August 21st were the first summary judgments by the Revolutionary Tribunal, meaning the first, and executions with the guillotine. August 21st, 1792. So this tribunal was a court. Court. It was a stooge. It was a drumhead court, kangaroo court. You're accused of being an enemy of the people. Yes, you're an enemy. That you sentence his death. Go outside and chop his head off. The first one murdered in this way was a royalist, Louis Collineau d'Agremont. August 22nd, the Paris Commune outlaws use of the terms of address Madame and Monsieur. That's too. They don't like it. So instead, it mandated by law, that one could only address another Frenchman as citizen, man or woman, so neutered, no Madame and Monsieur, no Mr. or Mrs., just citizen. September 2nd through 6th. The Reign of Terror, the actual Reign of Terror. The murders went on longer, but this is considered the Reign of Terror. September 2nd through 6th, 1792. It commenced with a ghoulish prison massacre of priests, nuns, aristocrats who had been arrested for being enemies of the revolution. In that 4-day period, 3 bishops, 220 priests, and 1,400 aristocrats were literally hacked to death with swords and axes in the prison where the government had thrown them. No trial or anything. Just obviously they're enemies of the people. If they're priests who had not taken the oath, and if they're aristocrats, well, then they're enemy of the people. September 20th, 1792, the Battle of Valmy, Valmy. The French brought 59,000 troops and 54 cannons against Brunswick. At that point, Brunswick only had 35,000 infantry and cavalry with him, as he had left the balance in small contingents along the way to guard his supply line. After losing 300 of his infantry to the first French artillery barrage, Brunswick withdrew. He retreated back to Germany. Now, he had never been enthusiastic about risking his life for the French monarchy, because this was a German. And he had not been reinforced by assets from Sweden and Austria, even though they technically were allied. Historical evaluation of Brunswick remains mixed. This conflict was really not his concern. He was only there at the behest of the Prussian king. And the Allies had not appeared as promised. Yet that month of indecision that he wasted in the Argonne forest forfeited the last possible opportunity before the royal executions to crush the revolution, at least in Paris. Before the year ended, Brunswick learned his error, as the conflict soon became very much his concern and everyone else in Germany. The still unpaid, lethargic, and demoralized French army was instantly aroused to unity of purpose by Brunswick's invasion when he crossed the border. Confused and divided about the collapse of France and the future of France, they certainly were. But they were of one mind in keeping their country out of foreign hands. So one thing could unify the French, it's we all hate the Germans. That they could agree on that. And the feeling was mutual, which is why Brunswick really, they're shooting at me, therefore I'm going to retreat. This new unity of purpose, to defend, Mother France, enabled the Revolutionary Assembly to muster sufficient forces for a two-pronged counterattack, north into Belgium, which, remember, was owned by Austria at that point, and they captured Brussels by November 16th, 1792, and east into Germany, invaded Germany, capturing Mainz in the Rhineland by December of 1792. September 20th, 1792. The newly elected legislature, the National Convention, held its first session behind closed doors in the Salle du Manège, the former riding school of the Tuileries Palace. And it elected a bureau of 749 deputies. 113 of them were the most radical among the Jacobins, the revolutionary movement, who took their seat in the highest benches of the hall. So this gave their nickname, the Montins, or the mountain, or the mountaineers, the montagnards, because they were up at the highest bench. So the mountain became the most extreme, because it keeps going more extreme. So this is yet another, even more extreme than the sans-culotte that we had, or the cordelier, and in that these were the homicidal, the violent homicidal, let's murder all the aristocrats, version of the revolution, the Montagnards. 2 days later, September 22nd, the National Convention proclaims the abolition they had already legislated the monarchy out of existence. So September 22nd, they declared the First French Republic. September 29th, French troops occupied Nice, Nice, which was then now it's part of Italy, but then it was separate. It was Savoy, in Savoy. October 3rd, French troops occupied Basel in Switzerland, which was then an ecclesiastical. It was ruled by an archbishop, and they proclaimed it a republic, independent republic. October 23rd, French troops in Germany captured Frankfurt. October 27th, the northern French army under Dumouriez invaded what is now Belgium. Then it was the Austrian Netherlands, and they captured Brussels on November 14th. On November 19th, the National Convention declares the right to intervene in any country, quote, where people desire to recover their freedom. November 20th. This is what doomed the king. With all of this going on, with France under attack, and that even though the invaders had been repulsed, there was still the feel, okay, foreigners are invading us, so we have to unite for Mother France. There were former servants of the monarch who knew things that the king didn't realize they knew. And this led to a search of the king's apartment in the Tuileries, including the armoire de fer, and they found hidden, secreted away, they found an iron strongbox containing Louis XVI's secret correspondence with foreign monarchs. And that was used, to actually charge him with treason. Because he was corresponding with foreign monarchs about invading France. France had actually been invaded. So this is going to lead to his trial. By November 28th, the French army invading Belgium captured Liège. December 3rd, Robespierre, leader of the Montagnard faction of the Jacobins. He was serving at that point as first deputy for Paris in the convention. Demanded that the king be put to death for treason. Once this correspondence was made known. but they're going to go through a trial. You see, so there's a republic, and so we have to have due process, of law. So we're gonna go through the theater of a trial. The trial of Louis XVI began on December 10th, 1792, and he was tried by the National Convention, sitting en banc as a whole, rather than before a court. The following day, Louis was brought in person before the convention. He appeared on December 11th, and again on December 26th. He did have a lawyer, a royalist lawyer, Raymond de Seze. That's Deseze. And so, he was presented, with there was the evidence against him, the letters corresponding about a foreign invasion. Undeniably, there had been a foreign invasion, repulsed by that point, but there still had been an invasion. So December 27th, a motion was put to the convention asking for judgment on the king. He was voted guilty. So then what to do about it? Robespierre declared, Louis must die so that the nation may live. Then his lawyer, Deseze, asked, and there were still a few more moderate Girondins in the assembly who at least voted enough to put the motion, who seconded the motion so they could put it up for a vote, to put the king's fate to a referendum, let all the voters decide, imprisonment, banishment, or death. But the convention rejected, they voted down the motion. It was put up for a vote, but they voted down the motion so that they would not put it up for a vote, for referendum, but that they would vote on the sentence for the king. January 15th, 1793, the convention declared Louis XVI guilty of conspiracy against public liberty by a vote of 707 to 0. So, unanimous. January 17th, in a vote lasting 21 hours, 361 deputies voted for the death penalty. 360 voted against the death penalty. And the tie-breaking vote was, ironically, a former aristocrat who was actually related. Well, they're all related, but he was of the Orléans, which was a cadet branch of the House de Bourbon. And a further irony is that later he would be guillotined, just like Louis was. But he voted, he voted for the death penalty, and he was the tie-breaking vote. January 21st, 1793, Louis XVI was beheaded at 10:22 a.m. at a place that is now the Place de la Revolution in Paris. He was going to speak, make his final words, but the commander at the execution ordered a drum roll to drown out his final words to the crowd. On March 9th, 1793, the government ordered a draft of 300,000 men to fight in the wars that they had provoked. Now, Brunswick had invaded, so that certainly was, could be considered national defense. But then the invasion of Austria and Germany and Nice and Switzerland, that was not defense. March 11th, 1793, a civil war began in France in the countryside in the region called the Vendée, the Vendee, which is a coastal region south of the Loire River and it's western France, the Atlantic side of France. It was a draft, It was a draft revolt. I mean, that these they didn't want to, be drafted in the army. To fight for this anti-religious, anti-Catholic government. In this moment, when the revolutionaries realized the situation they had placed themselves in, the most radical elements, the Montagnards and the legislature, Robespierre, those guys, decreed that there's a state of emergency. And again, they do not want to give power to one man, so there's not one executive, but another committee, a committee of public safety. Now, I'm not just making fun. That's actually what it was called, the Committee of Public Safety. Decreed this on March 26, 1793. to act as both supreme executive and judicial authority for the duration of the crisis. And so this is when Robespierre, who's in charge of the committee, actually the first president was Danton, but Robespierre was essentially became dictator. The radicals, the Montagnards, used it first to murder their revolutionary comrades who were not sufficiently radical, and then used it to purge anyone else they deemed a threat to their own power. Okay. Sorry about that. We had a power outage over the weekend, and so that was the IT guy. He has to shut off the phones to reset because they go through the internet. Anyway, not the internet. Yeah, they're connected to the. Okay, so. Let's see. Court records show that 16,594 were executed by guillotine after a drumhead trial. Another 40. Another 40,000 died in prison. Some murdered, others, died of mistreatment or hunger or disease. And how many died in street violence? There's no telling. With the demands of the foreign wars, as well as the Civil War, the committee decreed for the first time in modern history the military mobilization of the entire French nation. They had already called for a draft of 300,000, but this. Now the levée en masse, as a draft of every adult man, for the crisis. Numerous engagements were fought in Flanders, Alsace-Lorraine, Germany, Savoy, Italy, Switzerland. Covering all of them would take us too far afield, but there is one battle we have to mention because of what happened afterward. August 27th, 1793, the siege of Toulon. It's the French, one of the French ports on the Mediterranean, and it is still the headquarters of the French Mediterranean Fleet. They have an aircraft carrier stationed there. Okay, so Toulon. So I see Marseille over here, Toulon. Marseille is a larger port, but Toulon was, it is, headquarters for the French Mediterranean Navy. All right, so previously we saw that the British decided to remain neutral at the Declaration of Pillnitz, but the murder of Louis, and as well as the expansion of the wars, France, prompted them to become involved. And so England is primarily a naval power, so that naturally they're going to attack a port first. So the British, along with reinforcements from the Spanish Navy, conducted a blockade of the port of Toulon. Always something. At this point, 70 of the crews of 70 French ships declared for the monarchy against the revolution, and defected. So they went over to the English side. The rest of the French Navy either deserted or remained and fought for the revolution. If Toulon fell, then the Allies would be able to open another front by invading France from the south. So the siege of Toulon lasted for the rest of the year, in the course of which, on September 17th, sorry about that. I have a way, seminarians, and have a way. There's an application on this phone that allows me, when I'm away from the office, I can access voicemails. That people leave me on the office phone, and so since that has to be rebooted after the power outage, and the guy was just telling me I had to activate that application, so it's all synchronized. Man, this. All right. The things I never learned in seminary. All the adventures of parish priesthood. September 17th, 1793. The convention, the revolutionary legislature, passed a law of suspects, permitting the arrest and instant trial of anyone suspected of being an enemy of the revolution. With the let's see. It introduced the maxim specifying, put into law, that that the accused had to prove their innocence. No innocent until proven guilty. So you had to demonstrate you were innocent. And let's see. 500,000 were arrested under this law of suspects, and 17,000 were beheaded after a drumhead trial. Okay, October 5th, 1793. This is another, goofy thing these people did to have yet another definitive break from the past. The convention erased the Gregorian calendar. You see, that's because that's Catholic. And they adopted a new calendar, the Republican calendar. So the year one, beginning of the year one, they renamed all the months, and they changed the days of the week. There are no longer 7 days in a week. There were 10 days in a week. And we started, this is the year one. So it's the first, but not the last of the revolutions to do that. October 7th, 1793, the Revolutionary Assembly officially de-Christianized France. Outlawing the Catholic Church, period. So even the civil constitution of the civil church was also erased. 3 days later, October 10th, 1793, the government murdered Queen Marie Antoinette by beheading with a guillotine. 1 month later, November 10th, 1793, the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris was desecrated with a festival of reason. It's a neo-pagan charade in which an actress was garbed in a tricolor dress, and a dais was put over the altar in the cathedral, and a throne was put on top of that. So she was enthroned as the goddess of reason. December 19th. After 5 months of fighting for control of the vital port of Toulon, the British and the Spanish withdrew. The victory of the revolution was achieved under the leadership of a young colonel of artillery named Napoleon Bonaparte. As a reward, he was promoted to brigadier general and changed history. Napoleon Bonaparte, you should, but just in case, Napoleon, and Bonaparte, Bonaparte. Born on the solemnity of the Assumption, August 15th, 1769. His father, Carlo de Bonaparte, his mother, Maria Letizia Romolino. They were of Italian ancestry, but he was born on the island of Corsica. All right, so the actual. Yeah, here it is. Yeah, the city. I was thinking the city wasn't. So here's is Italy, of course, and then here's Corsica and Sardinia, and you see Ajaccio, Ajacco. That's where he was born. Napoleon was born there on this island. Now he was the fourth child and third son of this couple, and he ended up having some other younger siblings too. He was baptized Catholic under the name Napoleon. The Bonapartes, they were born in Corsica, but they were of Italian extraction. The Bonaparte, his father's family, had a Tuscan background, and then the family moved to Corsica in the previous century. His mother's ancestors were from Genoa, so both Italian. Napoleon was born the same year that the Republic of Genoa, which had control of the island of Corsica, ceded Corsica to France. So Corsica became part of France, and that's changed history. Because his father, who was actually an aristocrat, low-level aristocrat, but still had aristocratic birth. Now, once part of France, once Corsica became part of France, his father became an attorney and would be Corsica's representative to the court of Louis XVI, and he got that appointment in 1777, before the Revolution. And this enabled Napoleon to go to school in France. When he was 9 years old, he was sent to just a Catholic school in Autun in 1779. And then later, when he got older, he transferred to a junior military academy at Brienne. Napoleon was routinely bullied by his peers for his accent, his birthplace, his short stature. He had some distinctive mannerisms that they mocked. Bonaparte, by way of reaction, became reserved, applied himself to reading, mathematics, and geography, and apparently did very well at mathematics and geography. On completion of the junior military academy in 1784, he then went to a senior military school, an actual academy, the École Militaire. So it would be like the Citadel or West Point in our usage, which was in Paris. He studied artillery. He became the first Corsican to graduate from the École Militaire in Paris. Graduated September of 1785, and then was commissioned as a second lieutenant in an artillery regiment, a French artillery regiment. He served, his first posting was at Valence, second posting was at Azon, and that's where he was when the revolution erupted in 1789. Napoleon came to embrace the ideals of the revolution, became a supporter of the Jacobins. He was given command of a battalion, promoted to captain of artillery in the regular army in July of 1792. In July of 93, Bonaparte published a pro-Republican pamphlet, which was read, which was widely, well, not widely, but at least read by some important people, and that gained him the support of Augustin Robespierre, who was the younger brother of Maximilian Robespierre. Through this connection, Bonaparte was appointed senior artillery commander of the Republican forces at Toulon, to defend Toulon from the British and Spanish siege. He arrived on September 8th, and he conceived the plan to capture a hill where the Republican guns could dominate the city's harbor and actually open fire, and where it would be in range to hit blockading ships. And the strategy worked. That's why, once he could put cannonballs into the hulls of English ships, they withdrew and saved Toulon. And so Bonaparte, he was wounded too in the battle, so doubly heroic. He succeeded and was wounded. So this brought him to the attention of the Committee of Public Safety. So they promoted him. He was put in charge of artillery of the French Army of Italy. February 4th, 1794, the Revolutionary Convention finally votes to abolish slavery in all French colonies, hoping to get, by that expedient, to get Haiti back. But no, the former slaves who had taken over Haiti formed their own government, and they were not about to rejoin France because they figured that eventually some excuse would be found to enslave them again. But correctly, and there's no doubt that's exactly what would have happened. February 5th, Maximilian Robespierre lectured the convention on the necessity for terror, for domestic terror. Quote, "The foundations of a popular government in revolution are virtue and terror. Terror without virtue is disastrous. Virtue without terror is powerless. The government of the revolution is the despotism of liberty over tyranny." So seminarians, analyze that for logical fallacies. Yeah, let me know what you think. February 6th, as part of the civil war in the Vendée, 10,000 captured Vendée prisoners, captured by the revolutionary armies, were loaded onto barges, ostensibly for transport. And then those barges were sunk in the Loire River. So murdered 10,000 POWs. June 17th, 1794. 16 Carmelite sisters from Compiègne, north of Paris, were executed by the revolution, beheaded for being enemies, of the people. Their convent had been established in 1641. It was the 53rd Carmelite convent in France, following the Discalced reform of St. Teresa of Avila. They had a trial, a ridiculous show trial, a drumhead. And they were accused of treason because they had objects, Catholic objects, crucifix, rosaries, and that had all been outlawed. They also had symbols of the monarchy. So they had a fleur de lis, which was a symbol of the Bourbon family, although it was also a symbol of the resurrection. It's a lily. It's just a stylized lily. Anyway, they were convicted. At 8 o'clock in the evening, they were the final executions of the day. It took about 2 minutes to strap each victim to the bench, place their head in the stock to hold it still for the blade of the guillotine to sever. It was said for the first time during the Reign of Terror, the crowd was not screeching in glee, but instead, from when the first one was beheaded, I mean, they jeered and all and spit on him and all that while they were being transported. But once the, let's see, I have an account. On June 22nd, the sisters were arrested, and they were incarcerated in a former convent that had been stolen by the government, a convent of the Visitation that was being used as an improvised jail for political prisoners. On July 10th, they were transferred to the Conciergerie prison in Paris for the trial. Of course, they received no legal counsel because this was just a farce, a show trial. On the evening of July 17th, they were transported through the streets in an open cart. It took 2 hours. During that time, they sang the Miserere, the Salve Regina, Evening Vespers, Compline. Of course, it all had to be done from memory because their books were stolen. The crowd berated them, yelled insults, threw things at them, spit at them. And they gathered. I mean, this is just like the arena, the ancient Roman arena, the Muni and the Ludi, the public games, homicide fest. The sisters showed no fear. They forgave their guards, and those who were about to murder them. Witnesses say the final song that they sang together was Psalm 117, Laudate Dominum. The youngest of the group, Sister Constance, was the first to die. She, when they were, strapping her in, she was singing, and she continued to sing until the blade, cut it off. And each sister did the same. They continued a song while they were strapped in, and the song was. But after the first one, after the sister, she was singing, and as soon as that song, stopped with the guillotine, that's when it was said the crowd went silent. The oldest of the group was Sister Charlotte, age 78, and crippled. She needed a crutch. These are all saints now. They're martyrs, obviously. There are no surviving relics because their bodies were desecrated. I won't describe what was done. 24 other victims died on the same day that the sisters were murdered. On July 26th, 1794, Maximilian Robespierre gave a violent speech before the assembly, demanding, without giving names, the arrest and punishment of traitors to the Committee of Public Safety. And the people started to worry, as they thought, okay, he'd already killed so many people, and no one was radical enough for him. So anyone in his eyes could be an enemy of the revolution. So that's when some started to turn. They said, okay, we got to get rid of this guy. And so then they started to accuse Robespierre. So Robespierre mobilized 2,400 National Guard in front of the town hall. But as he learned what Lafayette learned and what the king had learned earlier, that you couldn't rely on these people in a revolutionary environment. So some they didn't resist, and those sent to arrest Robespierre were allowed through. He delayed for a time, and then he was just attacked. There was a melee. A gun was fired, and he was shot in the jaw, and the jaw was kind of hanging down. He survived long enough to be beheaded So they brought him and his brother, as well as others, to be beheaded. So he was beheaded on the evening of July 28th, along with some other supporters. There were 22, Robespierre, and 22 in all, along with his brother, Saint-Just, and a few others of the Mountain, were guillotined. This, 106. 22 were guillotined on that day, and then a total arrest of more of his allies as the Montagnards fell, and 106 total ended up being executed. And this was the end of the Committee of Public Safety, and of its actual power, and another turn in the revolution. The National Convention put Paris under the direct control of a national government. And this is, in the French history books, this is the Thermidorian reaction. Thermidor was the name of the month. Remember, they changed the name of all the months. So this was the month of Thermidor, Thermidorian, Thermidorian reaction. So this is the 9th of Thermidor in the year 2 of the revolution, which corresponds to the real date of July 27th, 1794. This was the inauguration of the French, not immediately, but about a year later, the French Directory, another of these committees, executive committees. The reaction, this is a reaction against a counter-revolution, but a revolutionary counter-revolution, where those who favored the revolution, like they didn't want the monarchy back, but they recognized that these guys had gone too far. So turned on the Montagnards and the Sans-Culottes and purged the most radical elements. April 5th through June 22nd, 1795, a Treaty of Basel, B-A-S-L-E, that's a town in Switzerland. This is when the first coalition against the revolution fell apart. Prussia, Saxony, Hanover, Hesse-Cassel, and Spain all made peace with the revolutionary government of France, which, de facto recognized it as the government. As part of the treaty with Spain, France received Saint-Domingue, the present Dominican Republic, which they had lost Haiti to the slave revolt, so now they got that. They wouldn't keep it long, though. August 22nd, 1795, the Directory, the French Directory, the Directoire, the churning bloodbath of transitional governments in France was driven by the inevitable loss of a common frame of reference for deciding policy. Having erased the church, erased the monarchy, revolutionary leadership had no shared vision of what France should become. Each individual had his own vision, but not one that united them. Even those who might have agreed, oh yeah, we want a republic, but then when you get down to details, well, what exactly does that mean? So factions coalesced around a few key concepts, but even members of those factions never remained united for long. So it was doomed to mitosis, just as the Protestant movement was doomed to continual mitosis. And invariably, members of these groups, even allied factions, started accusing each other of being insufficiently committed to the revolution, which means, ipso facto, an enemy of the revolution. And so there was a race to kill or be killed. As yet, up to that point, no one had articulated a vision on which all could agree. Well, you never have something where everybody agrees, but at least enough, a critical mass, would be enough to restore stability and start to solve the problems, which still none of this had addressed any of the problems of the collapsed economy, the problem with resources, the resource scarcity, the transportation problems. None of that had really been resolved. So to simplify a sanguinary tale, the Homicide Fest brought another committee to power, a five-man executive called the Directory, the Directoire. And through them, Napoleon re-enters our story. He was appointed by the Directory as general of the French armies in Italy. So yes, even though they had overthrown the monarchy, the new government in France was still pursuing the centuries-old pattern of Franco-Austrian conflict for control of Italy. The Austrian generals proved to be no match for Napoleon. He did not treat the church very well, so I don't like him. But I mean, to give him his due, he was one of the great generals in history. In terms of his tactical effectiveness and strategic effectiveness. He easily crushed the Austrians in a series of battles in 1796. Because Pope Pius VI, had steadfastly refused to form an alliance with the French revolutionary government, for obvious reasons, the Papal States were treated as enemy territory. Napoleon stole the most valuable part of the Papal State, the Romagna, combined it with Tuscany and Lombardy, which he conquered from the Austrians, and created a new political entity, the Cisalpine Republic, with its capital at Milan on July 9th, 1797. The appearance and victory of the French revolutionary armies in Italy revealed the existence of a vast underground of Italian nationalists who wanted Italy for the Italians. They detested the Austrians, and they detested the dukes and the monarchy that had ruled parts of Italy for centuries. The King of Naples, the Doge of Venice, the Dukes of Tuscany, and the Pope, who, remember, was also the temporal ruler of central Italy, of that strip of the Papal States going coast to coast. So these Italian nationalists hoped for a unification of all of Italy, which had not existed since the fall of Rome, and they believed the time had come. So this movement was called the Risorgimento, meaning the resurgence. That's RISORGIMENTO. The resurgence, the Risorgimento. It's also referred to as the movement of Irredentism, meaning the drive to reclaim unredeemed Italy. So IRREDENTISM. October 5th, 1795. The monarchist reaction that began with the Vendée draft riot reached a crescendo on October 5th of 1795 in a concerted attack on the Directory. This attack was handled very differently than when the revolutionaries did the same thing to the more benign Louis XVI. The Directory had in their service Napoleon. He simply turned the cannon on the crowd and opened fire with grape shot. So grape shot, it's like, so the cannons of the day, normally the shot was one ball, one big iron ball. But grape shot were they stuffed first gunpowder and then stuffed smaller grape-sized balls down into the cannon, like ball bearings. So turning it essentially into a shotgun. Each cannon then became a giant shotgun. And then proceeded to mow. And just open fire on the crowd. So he killed 1,600 with a cannon and saved the Directory. And so he was given independent command March 27th, 1796. And that is how the story of the French Revolution once more intersects with church history. So skipping dozens of battles and sieges, the result we'll fast forward to the Treaty of Campo Formio, CAMPO FORMIO, signed October 17th, 1797, which redrew the map of Europe. So this was the Directory, but it was accomplished by Napoleon on the battlefield. The result of which Belgium was the Austrian Netherlands, now Belgium, was annexed to France, so just stolen, became part of France. Northern Italy, Napoleon had already created the Cisalpine Republic of Lombardy, Tuscany, and the Romagna, but now it's recognized by Austria, Germany, the other powers, except England. And a puppet government was installed, dependent on France. The entire left bank, the western bank of the Rhine River, was annexed to France. It's Alsace-Lorraine. In the 19 months of his first independent command of an army, Napoleon had accomplished what French kings had been attempting since the collapse of the Carolingian Empire. And there were many who would consider that's the accomplishment of a lifetime, but not Napoleon. He was not about to stop. On February 15, 1798, after a French general named Louis Dufault was killed in a riot in Rome, of course the Pope got blamed for it, even though he had absolutely nothing to do with it, but, he was blamed for it. As, there's no evidence, but, evidence is not required, and when accusing a cleric of anything. So France then announced that Pius was deposed as Pope, and Napoleon declared that Rome was now a republic. Pius was placed under arrest, and he remained in custody of the revolutionary forces for the rest of his life, which, owing to the brutal, humiliating, vile, inhumane treatment he received, the rest of his life turned out to be only 18 months. In the same year as the wrongful imprisonment of Pope Pius VI, 1798, an Anglican priest named Thomas Malthus, Malthus, whose hobby was economic philosophy, published the first edition of a book length. It was an essay, but that was just the convention of the day. It was a book titled "Essay on the Principle of Population." It went through 6 editions in Malthus's lifetime, so it was a bestseller. The most famous assertion Malthus made was that without population control, the human species was doomed, because unchecked population increases geometrically, while food supply increases only arithmetically. So 1798, okay, so population control, again, nothing just, this didn't just start with 1960. Okay. So Pius died, let's see, November 9th, 1799. Napoleon, having achieved victory, he now, stunning victory. I mean, hyperbole aside, this is historically stunning victories, all they accomplished. He then turned on the Directory that had made him, and he just replaced them. He carried out a coup d'etat on November 9th, 1799, making himself the chief executive. And since they're still pretending it's a republic and they're using these ancient Roman antecedents or terms, he called it a consulate. So he would be the first consul as the chief executive. And he had two other guys, so a triumvirate, 3 consuls. That didn't last long. That's why nobody knows their names. Cabeseret and Lebrun were their names, but, you ever heard of them? No, that's them. So the first consulate, the coup d'etat was November 9th, and the consulate was declared on December 24th, 1799. So French historians generally consider this to be the end of the French Revolution and the beginning of the Napoleonic period, which was essentially a military dictatorship. But it's still I see it as part of a single event, because the coalition wars, are going to continue. So from 89 to the end, when Napoleon falls for the second time and last time, it's 26 years of warfare, over this. So it's a whole generation that really changed things. Okay, Pius VI died, finally overcome by the privation and abuse. He died a prisoner at Valence in France. They moved him across the Alps, and he got sick, and that's finally what killed him. He died on August 29th, 1799. And we'll see. Yeah, okay, that's it. We'll see what happened next. So we'll end there, and we'll pick up with the reign of the next pope next time. So for the moment, thank you for your attention. This session is adjourned.